Hello and welcome to IEMC Radio and Podcast. Today we're exploring the top news headlines for January 23rd. Buckle up, we've got stories from all over the globe.
It really does feel like a mix of everything today. International crime, you've got controversial pardons, global power plays, and social media is having some struggles. It really shows just how interconnected the world is.
Yeah, it does. Let's kick things off with a story that sounds like, like it's straight out of a heist movie.
Okay.
Two Nigerians were arrested in Kuwait, allegedly for robbing an exchange office. They got away with almost $15,000.
Wow, that's a lot of money. What's interesting is the tactics they used. It sounds like they were using stolen license plates for their getaway car.
Yeah.
And they even scoped out the exchange office from nearby rooftops just to figure out when the busiest times were.
It's pretty impressive how organized they were. Now, for a very different legal situation.
Okay.
In the U.S., former President Trump has pardoned two police officers who were convicted in the death of a young black man in Washington, D.C. back in 2020.
This is definitely a decision that has sparked a lot of debate. Some are arguing that it undermines trust in the justice system, while others believe it was, the right call. These officers were found guilty of crimes related to a high-speed chase that ended in a tragic fatality, and their original sentences were 66 and 48 months, respectively.
It's a tough one. It's a complex case. Raises questions about police conduct, about accountability, and
the use of presidential pardons.
Yeah, definitely a sensitive and multifaceted issue.
For sure. Now, shifting our attention to the global stage.
Okay.
Former President Trump is taking a hard line on the war in Ukraine. He's threatened Russia with increased taxes and sanctions if a peace agreement isn't reached soon.
So his goal seems to be a swift resolution to the conflict. Potentially within 100 days, it's an aggressive approach, and it raises some important questions. Will this actually pressure Putin into negotiations? Or could it escalate the conflict further?
The stakes are high. Yeah, no doubt. And in a related story,
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is preparing for possible economic retaliation after Trump suggested implementing tariffs on Canadian goods.
Trudeau has emphasized just how important Canada is to the U.S. economy, but it's clear that maintaining this relationship is going to require careful diplomacy and a delicate balancing act.
It's a tricky situation. The potential economic consequences could be significant for both countries.
Absolutely.
Now let's switch gears.
All right.
Let's talk about the power and potential pitfalls of social media.
Sure.
South Sudan has taken a pretty drastic measure. They're blocking access to platforms like Facebook and TikTok for 90 days.
Wow, that's a long time. What's the reasoning there?
Well, the reasoning is that these platforms are contributing to the spread of graphic violence, and they believe it's having a negative impact on mental health.
That makes sense,
Yeah.
especially after those disturbing videos surfaced showing attacks on South Sudanese refugees in neighboring Sudan.
It's a controversial move for sure. Raises questions about censorship,
Yeah.
the responsibility of these social media companies, and how to find a balance between freedom of expression and protecting vulnerable populations.
Oh, tough situation. No easy answers there.
Yeah. Meanwhile, in the U.S., the TikTok saga continues.
Oh, here we go again.
Trump has said he'd be open to Elon Musk buying the app, the new owner of Twitter.
That's interesting, especially considering TikTok is under all this pressure to separate from its Chinese owner because of all the security concerns.
It's a real cliffhanger. Could Musk be the solution here, or is this just another layer of complexity to this already complicated situation?
I guess we'll have to see.
Yeah. Now, our final stop takes us to Nigeria,
Okay.
where we have two stories that highlight the challenges the nation is facing. First up, the federal high court workers have gone on an indefinite strike
A strike? Why is that?
over unpaid salary increases.
I see.
They claim that the government hasn't implemented the new minimum wage or given them other promised raises.
So this strike could have some serious consequences for the justice system. I mean, leading to delays in cases and potentially limiting people's access to legal recourse.
It's definitely a worrying situation. And in another story from Nigeria,
Right?
a disturbing report has revealed the extent of oil theft and pipeline vandalism happening in the Niger Delta region.
How bad is it?
Over 179 incidents were reported in just 1 week.
Wow.
This illegal activity isn't just costing Nigeria millions in lost revenue, it's also causing environmental damage and fueling social unrest.
It's a stark reminder of the complex challenges that so many nations face.
These stories paint a picture of the world today, A world where crime and politics and technology and social issues are all intertwined.
Yeah, it's fascinating to see how these seemingly isolated incidents are connected by these larger global trends. We're seeing, rising economic pressures, political tensions, social unrest in various parts of the world.
That's a lot to process. But by exploring these issues, I think we can gain a better understanding of the world around us.
That's true. And these stories also make you think about the power dynamics at play, both within and between nations.
Like, take that story about the Nigerians arrested in Kuwait.
Yeah, raises questions about economic disparities and what drives people to these kinds of crimes.
And the Trump pardons highlight the deep divisions in the American justice system.
They've definitely reignited debates about racial justice, police accountability, limits of presidential power.
The situations with TikTok and South Sudan's social media ban really underscore the global struggle to balance freedom of expression with concerns about security and societal well-being.
It's a delicate balancing act. No one-size-fits-all solution. Each country, each situation requires careful consideration and nuanced approaches.
It's clear there's more to these headlines than meets the eye. They're like little windows into much larger and more complex issues.
Exactly, and by exploring those deeper layers, we can gain a more complete understanding of the world around us.
Feels like we're getting a crash course in global dynamics today.
Yeah, it really does. It underscores the point that even seemingly distant events can have these ripple effects that impact us all.
We were just talking about the economic pressures facing nations. That connects directly to the story about the Nigerians arrested in Kuwait.
Absolutely. It's a stark reminder of how economic disparities can drive people to pretty desperate measures.
Yeah. We often see this pattern repeated in regions struggling with poverty and limited opportunities.
And those economic pressures are often tied to political instability as well.
Exactly. Think about the situation in Nigeria with the oil theft and the striking court workers.
Yeah, it's all a complex web of economic challenges, government corruption, social unrest. It's
a vicious cycle. And speaking of political tensions, the situation between the U.S. and Canada is a prime example of how quickly economic disputes can escalate.
Trump's suggestion of tariffs on Canadian goods could have a huge impact on both economies. It's a reminder that even close allies can find themselves at odds when economic interests clash.
It really makes you think about how fragile these international relationships can be.
It does.
But on a slightly different note.
Okay.
These stories about social media really highlight the challenges we face in the digital age.
Yeah, I mean, the South Sudan social media ban, that's a pretty drastic example of a government trying to control the flow of information.
Raises concerns about censorship and suppression of free speech, even if their goal is to protect citizens from harmful content.
And then you've got the whole TikTok saga in the US, which shows how anxieties about data security, national security, are getting tied up with social media.
Oh, it's a reminder that these platforms aren't just for entertainment and connection. They're powerful instruments that can be used for surveillance, propaganda, even political manipulation.
It really is a lot to wrap your head around.
It is. So where do we go from here? What can we do as individuals to make sense of this complex, ever-changing world?
Well, I think the first step is to really cultivate a healthy skepticism towards the information we consume. We're bombarded with news from so many sources, and it's crucial to evaluate those sources critically, consider their biases, potential agendas.
So we can't just passively absorb whatever we see on social media or hear on the news.
Exactly. We need to be active participants in the process of information gathering and analysis.
So that means fact-checking, seeking out diverse perspectives, engaging in thoughtful discussions. It sounds like a call to action for more informed and engaged citizenship.
Precisely. We all have a role to play in shaping a more informed and equitable world. And that starts with being aware of the challenges we face and understanding how they're
all interconnected. It's a lot to take in, but it's also empowering to realize that we have the capacity to make a difference. These news stories may seem overwhelming at times, but they can also be a catalyst for positive change if we approach them with a critical eye and a willingness to engage in constructive dialogue.
Yeah, it definitely is a lot to think about, but it's important to stay informed, you know?
Absolutely. The more we understand about these complex issues, the better equipped we are to navigate them and hopefully contribute to finding some solutions.
While we're on the topic of solutions, was there anything from today's headlines that really stood out to you? Anything that gives you hope or points towards positive change?
Amidst all the negativity, I was actually struck by Prime Minister Trudeau's response to the potential tariffs from the U.S.
Oh, what about it impressed you?
His emphasis on diplomacy and collaboration, I think it's a good reminder that even when you've got economic and political pressures, there's always room for dialogue and constructive engagement. That's a really good point. It's easy to get caught up in the conflict, but finding common ground, ultimately, is the best path forward.
Exactly. And even in situations where compromise seems impossible, just keeping those lines of communication open can be a step in the right direction.
So maybe that's the takeaway for our listeners today. Stay informed, stay engaged, and stay hopeful. Even when the news seems bleak, there are always those glimmers of possibility, opportunities for positive change.
Couldn't agree more. We all have a role to play in shaping a better future. And it starts with understanding the challenges and being willing to engage in thoughtful dialogue and action.
Thank you for listening to today's top news headlines on IAMC Radio and Podcast.